The door closed before Mara Whitfield could finish her sentence. Not slammed, not even harsh, just a quiet press of wood against the frame, but the sound cut through her like a verdict. She stood alone in the hospital corridor with her mop bucket, the faint squeak of its wheels echoing like a reminder of her place. The fluorescent light above her buzzed and flickered, pale blue across the tiles, as though the building itself were shivering. From inside the patient room came muffled voices, then laughter. Doctors with pressed white coats, nurses who knew they belonged. Mara could picture their faces without seeing them, casual smiles. The kind reserved for those who carried authority. She was not meant to interrupt their rhythm. She was meant to clean around it. Still, the image of the man on the bed burned in her mind. His lips had been edged with blue, his hand trembling as it reached for a glass of water. The smell rising from the cup was sharp, metallic, unnatural. She had tried to warn them, her voice low and urgent. "Something is wrong." But no one had turned. The words dissolved into the sterile hum of machines. She bent down, adjusting the mop handle, though it did not need adjusting, just to keep her hands from shaking. The bleach stung her skin. Her shoes, thin and worn, slid slightly on the slick floor. Invisible again, she thought. The phrase had followed her for years. She could pass through whole rooms without being noticed, her silence becoming part of the furniture. She remembered her father's workshop, the basement that always smelled of copper and smoke. He had taught her to notice the smallest traces, to respect the hidden signs that others overlooked. "Truth has no uniform," he had once said, guiding her fingers over the rim of a beaker. "It hides in places people refuse to see." Mara had carried that lesson like a secret badge, though the world had little interest in listening. A sudden crash from the room startled her, the sound of glass shattering against tile. Voices shifted from laughter to annoyance. Her body leaned forward before her mind could stop it, instinct pulling her toward the door. Her hand lifted, almost touched the handle, but she froze. She was not called for. She was the one who arrived after the fact, never during. The hallway was empty except for her. At the far end, a vending machine hummed steadily, the neon glow of its buttons throwing faint color on the wall. Mara straightened her back, forcing her breath to slow. She pushed the mop head across the tile, water spreading thin, reflecting the flicker of light overhead. But her mind would not let go. The tremor in the patient's hand, the bitter smell in the cup, the wrongness in the air. The door opened a crack. A young physician stepped out, sleeves spotted with water from the spill. His face barely glanced her way before moving past. "Clean this up," he said, already walking down the hall. His shoes clicked confidently against the floor, each step carrying the certainty she lacked. Within seconds, his laughter joined the voices inside again. Mara lowered her eyes. She pushed the mop forward, careful strokes, steady as though erasing herself from sight. But beneath her calm movements, her chest was tight. She knew what she had seen. She knew what she had smelled. And though silence had protected her from ridicule, it pressed heavy on her like a second skin. The mop bumped against the base of the wall with a dull thud. She stilled, listening. For a moment, only the faint beeps of monitors leaked through the door. Then came the sound that changed everything, a cough, jagged and raw, the kind that cut into silence. Then nothing. Her breath caught. Every nerve pulled taut. She gripped the mop handle until her knuckles whitened. Time seemed to slow in the empty corridor. She waited, heart pounding for another sound from within the room. None came. The fluorescent light above her buzzed louder, its flicker casting shadows like thin blades across the floor. Mara's eyes fixed on the door. She felt the weight of her own invisibility pressing against the moment. To remain silent was safe. To speak was dangerous. But between the two, a truth had begun to take shape, undeniable as the ripples in her mop water. The voices inside had gone quiet, Too quiet. Mara took a step back, her breath shallow, her body still angled toward the door. She knew she was not meant to be part of this world, but she also knew she had already crossed into it the moment she smelled that bitter trace. Her mop bucket rattled softly as the wheels shifted, the sound breaking the silence like a whispered signal. Mara did not move again. She simply watched the door, her eyes narrowed, her pulse quickening. Something had begun, though she could not yet name it. And in that still hallway, with only the hum of the vending machine and the buzz of a failing light above her, Mara Whitfield understood that invisibility had an end. The silence in the corridor stretched until it felt unbearable. Mara Whitfield stood rooted to the spot, her mop still against the tiles, her chest rising and falling in shallow rhythm. Behind the closed door, voices returned at last, hurried, clipped, no longer coated with laughter. She caught fragments through the wall, a command barked, a machine's tone rising, then the sudden roll of wheels as the bed was shifted. Her pulse throbbed in her temples. She leaned against the mop handle for balance, watching the door as if it might burst open at any moment. It did not. The commotion faded down the hall, swallowed by swinging doors and distance. The patient was gone. Mara inhaled, the smell of bleach sharp in her nostrils. She felt the urge to follow, to see whether the man was still breathing, but her shoes did not move. Her job was to remain where she was, to erase what others left behind. When at last the door swung open again, the room was empty. Only the faint smell of spilled liquid and the shattered glass across the tile remained. She stepped inside slowly, the mop bucket rattling behind her. The room carried the same sterile brightness as every other, but something lingered in the air, a bitterness that clung to the back of her throat. She bent to pick up the shards of glass, careful not to cut her fingers. One fragment glinted in her palm, its rim stained faintly at the edge. She studied it too long, then dropped it into the bin. Her hand shook as she wrung out the mop. Water dripped steadily onto the floor, spreading thin across the tile. She pressed the strands into the puddle, wiping away evidence, but her mind refused to let go of what she had seen. The tremor in the man's hand, the bluish tint at his lips, the smell. She paused, the mop hovering just above the floor. Was she the only one who noticed? Or had the others noticed and chosen to dismiss it, unwilling to question their own certainty? The thought left her cold. The hallway was quiet again by the time she rolled the bucket back toward the storage closet. She pushed open the heavy door, its hinges creaking, and slipped inside. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with disinfectants, sprays, folded linens. A single bulb glowed overhead, yellow and faint, making shadows stretch long across the floor. Mara leaned against the wall, closing her eyes. She felt the sting of bleach on her skin, the ache in her shoulders from hours of labor. She had lived with this rhythm for years. Scrub, mop, vanish. Speak only when spoken to. Yet tonight, the silence felt different. It pressed against her chest like a weight she could not shift. She heard footsteps approach and stiffened. The door opened without warning. Clara Ames, one of the senior nurses, slipped inside. Her scrubs were rumpled, her eyes sharp even in the dim light. She glanced at Mara, then at the mop bucket. "You were outside that room," Clara said. Her tone was not a question. Mara hesitated, then nodded once. "What did you see?" The question startled her. Rarely did anyone ask. Mara studied Clara's expression, searching for mockery, but found only exhaustion. "He was shaking," Mara said quietly. "His lips, they looked blue, and the drink. It smelled wrong." Clara's gaze flickered. For a moment her composure faltered. Then she stepped closer, her voice dropping. "Do not say that outside this room. Not to anyone." Mara's breath caught. "Why?" Clara's hand brushed through her hair, fingers trembling slightly. "Because no one will believe you. They will turn it back on you. They will say you imagined it or worse. And if you keep pushing, they will make sure you are gone." The bulb above them buzzed faintly. Mara stared at the nurse, her mind racing. The warning was not born of malice. It sounded like experience. She wanted to ask more, but Clara had already turned toward the door. "Clean yourself up," Clara said. "Then go home. Forget it." The door closed behind her, leaving Mara in silence once again. Forget it. The words echoed, but they clashed with the image in her mind. The glass, the tremor, the bitter trace in the air. She rinsed her hands at the sink, watching the water swirl pink where a shard of glass had nicked her palm. The sting grounded her, sharp and real. She wrapped her hand in a strip of gauze from the shelf, then tucked her hair back beneath her cap. When she finally stepped outside, the hospital had grown quieter. Night had thickened around the building, the parking lot washed in sodium light. She walked to her bus stop, shoes scuffing against the concrete. The city hummed faintly beyond, distant sirens, the low roll of traffic. Mara sat on the bench, folding her hands in her lap. Her eyes fixed on the streetlight overhead, moths circling in restless loops. The night air carried the smell of rain on asphalt. She thought again of her father's words, long ago. Truth hides in what others refuse to see. The bus arrived, brakes hissing, doors opening with a sigh. She climbed aboard, sliding into a seat near the back. The driver did not glance at her. No one ever did. She stared out the window as the city slid past in fragments of neon and shadow. But somewhere behind her silence, a decision was forming. She did not yet know what it meant. Only that she could not forget. When she reached her stop, the streets were nearly empty. She walked the final blocks to her apartment, the keys cold in her hand. Her building loomed above her, brick darkened with age. She climbed the narrow stairs, each creak echoing, until she reached her door. Inside, the room smelled faintly of soap and stale bread. She set her shoes by the wall, her bag on the chair, then sank onto the thin mattress. For a long time she sat in the dark, listening to the tick of the radiator. Her thoughts circled like moths around light. She closed her eyes. The patient's face appeared again. The glass. The cough that cut the silence. She told herself to stop, to let it fade. But the images clung to her. She knew she would carry them into sleep and into the next day. And when morning came, she would rise again, pull on her uniform, and return to the same halls that had dismissed her. But something had shifted. A seed had been planted, and it would not stay buried. Morning broke in a dull smear of gray across the city. Mara Whitfield rose before her alarm, the sound of rain against her window pulling her into wakefulness. She sat at the edge of her narrow bed, her back bent, fingers pressed hard against her knees. Sleep had not loosened the images from the night before. They had clung to her like a second skin. The man's trembling hand, the metallic scent rising from the cup, the cough that ended in silence. She dressed slowly, buttoning her uniform with deliberate care. The fabric smelled faintly of detergent, a comfort she tried to hold on to. Outside, the rain washed the streets into blurred reflections, neon signs bleeding into puddles. By the time she reached the bus stop, her shoes were soaked through, her toes numbed by cold water. The hospital loomed as it always did, vast and pale against the sky. She stepped inside, the smell of antiseptic and old coffee washing over her. The corridors were already awake, filled with the shuffle of nurses and the clipped voices of doctors. Mara pushed her mop bucket forward, the wheels squeaking as they always had, her figure blending once more into the background. But today she carried a weight that changed how she moved. Every sound sharpened. Every glance lingered longer. She noticed the way people looked past her, how easily her presence dissolved. Yet beneath that invisibility, her mind churned. Midway through the morning, she found herself back outside the same room. The patient's bed was empty, stripped of sheets. A new name was already posted on the chart outside, neat letters written in black ink. The turnover was quick, efficient, as if nothing had happened here at all. Mara felt her stomach tighten. She pushed her mop along the floor, careful strokes that left the tiles shining. Her reflection stared back at her, blurred by water. She thought of Clara Ames, the senior nurse, and her warning in the storage closet, "Do not speak of it." The words had been sharp, final. Yet now, standing in front of the empty bed, Mara felt the pressure of silence pressing harder against her chest. She moved down the corridor, her bucket rattling. At the far end, she saw Clara speaking with a group of staff, her hands gesturing quickly. Clara's voice was low, but her eyes darted toward Mara once before flicking away. That fleeting glance was enough to make Mara's skin prickle. She wondered if Clara regretted speaking to her at all. By midday, Mara found herself assigned to the lower floor, where the light was dimmer and the corridors quieter. Here the walls smelled faintly of damp plaster, and the hum of machines was replaced by silence. She preferred it, though it deepened her thoughts. She paused by the vending machine, the same one she had heard humming last night. She pressed her palm against its side, feeling the vibration through the metal. For a moment, she imagined voices trapped inside, echoes of laughter, dismissals, warnings. She closed her eyes and inhaled. She told herself she should stop thinking, that she should allow herself to fade back into rhythm. But the image of the patient would not leave. In the afternoon, she carried a bag of linens into one of the small staff rooms. The television on the wall flickered with local news, voices filling the air. She set the bag on the counter, then froze. A familiar face flashed across the screen. The patient. His photograph, younger, healthier, smiling in a suit. The headline beneath his name read, "Businessman in critical condition after sudden collapse." Mara's breath caught. She moved closer, heart pounding. The newscaster's words rolled over her. The man had been rushed to intensive care during the night. No details were given, but his condition was said to be unstable. She felt her throat tighten. So he had not died. Not yet. But his collapse was public now, framed as a mystery. Mara stared at the screen until one of the nurses entered, muttering about the rain, and she quickly stepped back. She could not allow them to see the intensity in her face. The rest of the day passed in fragments, cleaning rooms, carrying supplies, watching shadows shift across walls. But her mind was fixed on the news. She remembered again the smell in the cup, the faint stain on the glass shard, the tremor in his hand. She knew what others refused to see. That evening, as she prepared to leave, Clara Ames appeared at the end of the corridor. Her expression was drawn, her eyes weary. She approached quietly, her voice low enough that no one else could hear. "You saw the news," Clara said. Mara nodded once. Clara's jaw tightened. She looked as though she wanted to say more but stopped herself. Instead, she pressed a folded piece of paper into Mara's hand. "Forget last night. For your own sake. Do not let them notice you are watching." Before Mara could respond, Clara turned and walked away, her shoes clicking down the hall. Mara unfolded the paper. It was blank. For a moment, she thought Clara had made a mistake. Then she understood. It was not about what was written. It was a warning disguised as nothing at all. She slipped the paper into her pocket and walked toward the exit. The rain had stopped, but the streets glistened under the glow of street lamps. She moved slowly, her reflection trailing beside her in every puddle. At the bus stop, she sat alone. Her shoes were damp again, her hands rough with bleach. She pulled the blank paper from her pocket and stared at it under the streetlight. It looked like emptiness, but to her, it carried weight. She folded it back carefully, slid it into her bag, and lifted her gaze toward the hospital rising in the distance. Its windows glowed faintly, like watchful eyes. Mara felt something stir in her chest. Fear, yes, but also a thread of defiance. She whispered to herself, so quietly that no one else could hear, "I will not forget." And in that moment, the silence of the night felt heavier than any sound. The rain had returned by the next morning, steady and cold, sliding in sheets across the hospital windows. Mara Whitfield arrived early, her uniform damp at the cuffs, her shoes squeaking faintly with every step. She carried her mop bucket down the corridor, blending as she always did into the machinery of the building. Yet inside, her thoughts pushed forward with restless urgency. The blank slip of paper Clara Ames had pressed into her hand the night before was folded tightly in her pocket. She touched it once as she walked, feeling its thin edge against her fingers. An empty page, but heavy with warning. Forget last night. Do not let them notice you are watching. She tried to obey, forcing her eyes downward, her movements quiet. But the harder she tried to disappear, the more details pressed against her senses. Doctors' voices rising in sharp bursts outside closed doors, nurses whispering in corners, a silence that followed certain names when they were spoken. It was not just one man who had collapsed. There was something wider, something hidden beneath the polished floors. By midday, she found herself assigned to the intensive care wing. She pushed her mop slowly along the long corridor, each stroke careful, steady. Through the glass panes of the patient rooms, she saw figures lying motionless, wires crawling from their bodies into machines that hummed in steady rhythm. Most were older, but not all. Their faces were pale, their lips faintly discolored. She paused outside one room. A woman lay in the bed, her hair cropped short, her skin drawn tight against her bones. Beside her, a half-empty cup sat on the tray. The smell reached Mara even through the glass, faint but familiar. Bitter, metallic, wrong. Her hand tightened on the mop handle, the same trace she had noticed before. A voice broke her stillness. "You keep moving." She turned. A physician stood behind her, tall, sharp-eyed, his badge reading Dr. Halverson. His expression carried no warmth, only impatience. "This is not your place," he said. Mara lowered her gaze. "Yes, sir." She pushed the bucket forward, her shoulders tense, but her mind burned with questions. How many had been given that same drink? How many lay here now because no one had spoken? In the storage closet later, she sat on a stool, her hands trembling. The smell of bleach surrounded her, familiar and harsh. She pulled the folded paper from her pocket, staring at its blank surface. For a long time she said nothing. Then she whispered aloud, her voice barely audible in the dark room. "If I stay silent, they will keep falling." Her words startled her. Spoken aloud, they felt heavier, more dangerous. She slipped the paper back into her pocket just as the door opened. Clara Ames stood in the doorway, her face pale, her eyes scanning the room quickly before resting on Mara. "You were near the ICU," Clara said softly. Mara nodded. "I saw another one." Clara closed the door behind her, stepping fully inside. Her shoulders slumped as if she carried a weight too heavy to show in the open. "You need to stop looking." "I cannot." Mara's voice cracked, but she did not look away. "I know what I saw. It is not just one patient." Clara's jaw tightened. For a moment she looked as if she might argue, then her shoulders dropped. "You are not wrong," she whispered. The silence that followed pressed between them. Mara felt her pulse quicken. "Then why are you telling me to stay quiet?" Clara leaned closer, her voice low, trembling. Because this place will bury you if you speak. I have seen it happen. Good people turned into ghosts. They will strip you of your job, your name, your credibility. They will make sure no one listens. Mara's throat tightened. And if I stay silent? Clara's eyes glistened, though no tears fell. Then at least you will survive. The words struck Mara harder than she expected. Survival. That was all she had been doing for years, fading into the background, unnoticed, unchallenged. Yet now, survival felt like another kind of death. Before she could reply, a knock rattled against the closet door. Clara straightened instantly, her face smoothing into neutrality. She opened the door to reveal Dr. Halverson, his sharp eyes flicking between them. "What are you doing in here?" he demanded. "Checking supplies," Clara said quickly. Her voice was steady, practiced. Halverson's gaze lingered on Mara. His eyes were cold, assessing, as though he could see through her silence. At last he stepped back. "Do not linger," he said, his tone clipped. Then he turned and walked away. Clara exhaled once, quietly, before following. She paused in the doorway just long enough to glance back at Mara. The look in her eyes was warning and plea at once. Then she was gone. Mara sat alone in the dim light, the air thick with the smell of disinfectant. She pressed her palms against her knees, grounding herself. She felt fear rising in her chest, but beneath it something steadier began to grow. A quiet resolve. That evening, as she left the hospital, the rain had eased into a mist. The city glowed faintly in the wet, lights smearing across pavement. She walked slowly, her shoes damp again, her body heavy with exhaustion. At the bus stop, she sat on the cold metal bench, her hands folded around the slip of blank paper. Across the street, a man leaned against a lamppost, his coat collar turned high against the damp. His face was half hidden, but his gaze seemed fixed in her direction. Mara shifted, uncertain. When the bus arrived, she stood quickly, boarding without looking back. From the window, she glanced once more toward the lamppost. The man was gone. The bus rolled forward, carrying her into the night. She pressed her forehead against the glass, her breath clouding the window. She told herself it was nothing, a trick of exhaustion. Yet the unease lingered, settling deep into her bones. By the time she reached her apartment, she knew sleep would not come easily. She climbed the narrow stairs, unlocked her door, and stepped inside. The room was dark, silent. She dropped her bag onto the chair and sat on the edge of the bed, the blank paper still in her hand. For a long time she stared at it, her pulse steady, her mind alive. At last, she slid it beneath the mattress, hiding it away. Then she whispered into the stillness, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. "They will not silence me." The radiator ticked once, sharp in the darkness, as though answering. Mara Whitfield rose the next morning with the weight of her own words still echoing in the room. "They will not silence me." She had whispered it into the dark like a vow, though even as the words left her mouth she had felt the tremor in her hands. Yet by dawn, the tremor had steadied. She pulled on her damp shoes, buttoned her uniform, and stepped into the rain-washed streets. The hospital greeted her with its familiar hum, elevators sighing, intercoms crackling, carts rattling down long corridors. She moved as she always did, silent, unnoticed, the mop bucket squeaking faintly before her. Yet inside her, something was shifting. The walls no longer felt impenetrable. Every glance, every word carried weight, as though the building itself were alive with secrets. She began her rounds on the lower floors, scrubbing stains no one else saw, wiping fingerprints from glass doors. Yet her eyes were alert, searching. In one room, she saw another patient lying pale against white sheets, a cup half drained beside the bed. The bitter trace in the air made her throat tighten. She lingered too long, long enough for a nurse to notice. Keep moving, the nurse said, sharp but distracted, her attention fixed on a chart. Mara lowered her head and obeyed. In the storage closet later, she pressed her palms against the shelves, breathing hard. How many times could she walk past the same wrongness and do nothing? She thought of Clara Ames, her whispered warnings. She thought of the man leaning against the lamppost the night before. The unease settled deeper. By afternoon, she could not hold her silence. She waited until the corridor thinned of staff, then slipped into the small lounge where the television flickered faintly with muted news. A young orderly sat at the table, his badge reading Nathan Ortiz. He was new, not yet hardened by the culture of the hospital. Mara had noticed the way he held doors open for patients, the way his voice softened when he spoke to families. She approached slowly, her mop handle clutched like a staff. Nathan glanced up, surprised. "Could I ask you something?" Mara's voice was low, careful. "Sure," he said, setting down his cup of coffee. "Have you noticed the patients? The ones in ICU, the cups they are given?" Her words stumbled, her throat tightening. "Do they smell wrong to you?" Nathan frowned. "Smell wrong?" Mara nodded, her hands trembling. "Bitter, metallic. It does not belong." For a moment, Nathan only studied her. Then he shrugged, uncertain. "I do not go near their meds. That is all pharmacy and nurses." "Why?" Mara's pulse quickened. She wanted to press, to pour everything she had seen into his ears, but fear held her back. If he laughed, if he dismissed her, it would crush what little resolve she had built. She shook her head instead. "Forget it." But Nathan did not laugh. His gaze lingered on her, curious. "You see more than people think, do you not?" he said quietly. Then, before she could answer, he rose and left, his footsteps fading down the hall. Mara stood in the empty lounge, her chest tight. The words had been simple, almost casual, but they stirred something. Someone had noticed her, not as a shadow, but as a watcher. That evening, as she gathered her things to leave, she passed Clara in the corridor. Their eyes met briefly. Clara's expression was guarded, but beneath it Mara caught a flicker of fear. Clara gave the smallest shake of her head, a warning without words. Mara looked away, heart pounding. Outside, the air was sharp with the smell of wet asphalt. The sky was bruised with clouds, street lamps casting pale circles on the pavement. Mara walked toward the bus stop, her bag heavy against her shoulder. As she neared the corner, she felt it again, that sense of being watched. She glanced back. Across the street, a car idled with its lights off, rain streaking its windshield. She could not see the driver, but the shape of a figure shifted inside. Her pace quickened, shoes splashing in shallow puddles. The bus arrived with a hiss of brakes, and she climbed aboard without looking back. From her seat near the rear, she watched the car through the rain-smeared glass. It followed for 2 blocks before vanishing into the dark. Her stomach tightened. This was no longer imagination. Someone was paying attention. Back in her apartment, she stripped off her damp uniform and sat on the edge of the bed, her body heavy with exhaustion. The radiator ticked, the same steady rhythm as the machines in the hospital. She pulled the blank slip of paper from beneath the mattress, smoothing its edges. An empty page, yet full of meaning. Forget. Do not let them notice you. But now they already had. She set the paper on the small table, staring at it under the dim lamp. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. Truth hides in what others refuse to see. She thought of the patients, their pale lips, their trembling hands. She thought of Clara's fear, Nathan's curious eyes, the car idling in the rain. Her hands clenched in her lap. She knew she was stepping into something that could consume her. But silence no longer felt safe. Silence was complicity. She leaned forward, pressing her elbows to the table. "I will find proof," she whispered. The words trembled, but they were real. She did not yet know how, only that she could not turn back. Outside her window, the rain eased into silence, but the night felt charged, as if waiting for her next step. Mara Whitfield returned to the hospital the next morning with a decision already burning in her chest. She would not keep walking past the wrongness. She would not let silence cover it. Proof. She needed proof. Without it, her words would be dust in the air, swept away by laughter or scorn. The corridors were bright and cold, the smell of antiseptic rising from every surface. Mara moved through them with her mop bucket, her face calm, her pace steady, though inside her nerves trembled like wires under strain. She had watched long enough. Today she would act. Her chance arrived sooner than expected. Midway through her rounds, she was sent to clean a room vacated only minutes before. The patient had been transferred, leaving behind a tray on the bedside table. A cup still sat there, half full, a faint ring of liquid staining the rim. Mara's pulse quickened. She closed the door behind her, the quiet of the room wrapping around her. She moved toward the tray, her eyes fixed on the cup. The smell rose as she lifted it, bitter, metallic, unmistakable. She set it back down, her hands trembling. From her pocket she pulled a small glass vial. She had taken it from her father's old box of belongings, one of the few objects she had saved when she cleared out the house after his death. He had taught her to respect evidence, to preserve what others might discard. Now his lesson felt alive in her hands. Carefully, she poured a trace of the liquid into the vial, sealing it tight. She wrapped it in a cloth and slipped it into her bag, her breath quick and shallow. She returned the cup to the tray and smoothed the sheets, leaving the room as she had found it. When she stepped back into the corridor, her face showed nothing. She pushed her bucket forward, her movements deliberate, her heart racing. She had crossed a line. All day she carried the vial in her bag, its presence heavy against her side. Every time she saw Dr. Halverson striding down the hall, every time Clara's eyes flicked toward her with quiet warning, she felt the danger pressing closer. Yet beneath the fear, there was a thread of resolve, steady and unyielding. In the afternoon, she found herself near the staff lounge again. Nathan Ortiz sat at the table, flipping through a worn paperback during his break. Mara paused in the doorway, then stepped inside. "Can I trust you?" she asked softly. Nathan looked up, startled. He studied her face, then set the book aside. "With what?" Mara glanced at the closed door before pulling the vial from her bag. She held it in her hand, the glass catching the light. "This was left in a patient's room. It should not smell the way it does." Nathan leaned closer, his brow furrowing. He sniffed once, then recoiled. "That is strong, like metal." Mara nodded. "It is wrong. I need it tested, but I cannot do it alone. They will not listen to me." Nathan hesitated, his eyes searching hers. "You know this could get us both in trouble." "Yes," Mara said simply. He sat back, exhaling slowly. "There is a lab tech I know. Off-duty owes me a favor. I might be able to get this looked at quietly." Mara's chest tightened. "Would you?" Nathan nodded, though his expression carried unease. "But we have to be careful. If anyone finds out you took this, they will come for you. Hard." She slipped the vial back into her bag, her hands steady now. "I already know." They spoke no more. Nathan returned to his book, Mara to her mop. But a thread had formed between them, fragile yet real. That evening, when Mara left the hospital, the sky was low and heavy with clouds. The streets glistened with fresh rain, the air thick with damp. She walked quickly toward the bus stop, her bag heavy against her shoulder. The sense of being watched returned. At the corner, she paused and glanced back. A man stood across the street, half-shadowed beneath a street lamp. His coat collar was raised, his face obscured, but she felt his gaze fixed on her. Her breath caught. She turned and walked faster, her shoes splashing in shallow puddles. The bus arrived with its familiar hiss, and she climbed aboard, her heart pounding. Through the window, she searched the street, but the man was gone. Back in her apartment, she placed the vial on the small table, staring at it under the dim lamp. This tiny object carried danger, yes, but also possibility. It was more than suspicion, more than whispered warnings. It was something real, something that could not be erased by laughter or dismissal. She pressed her hand to the table, steadying herself. "You taught me this," she whispered into the quiet, thinking of her father. "Evidence speaks." The radiator ticked, the sound sharp in the still room. Mara leaned back in her chair, exhaustion washing over her. Outside, the night was thick and silent. Yet she felt the weight of a choice pressing harder than ever. She had stepped onto a path she could not turn from, and the shadows had already noticed. The vial gleamed faintly in the lamplight, small but unyielding. Mara folded her arms across her chest, her eyes fixed on it, and whispered into the silence. "They will not bury me." The vial was gone. Mara Whitfield woke to the sound of her alarm and reached instinctively for the small table where she had left it. Her hand brushed the empty surface. She sat up quickly, eyes darting in the dim light. The lamp, the folded slip of paper, the chair pushed slightly askew. Everything was where she had left it, except for the vial. Her breath came sharp, fast. She searched the floor, the chair, beneath the bed. Nothing. The glass had vanished as though it had never existed. She pressed her palms hard against her knees, willing herself to breathe. The apartment door was locked, the window latched. Yet the evidence she had risked everything to gather was gone. Someone had been here. By the time she reached the hospital, her body was taut with unease. The corridors glowed too bright, every sound amplified, the squeal of wheels on linoleum, the sharp laugh of a doctor, the distant clang of a cart. She moved quietly, head lowered, but her mind raced. Without the vial, she had nothing but suspicion, no proof, no weight. She found Nathan Ortiz near the elevator, holding a stack of charts. His expression shifted when he saw her, registering the tension in her face. "It is gone," she whispered, stepping close. Nathan frowned. "What do you mean?" "The vial, from my apartment." Her voice trembled, though she tried to steady it. Nathan's brow furrowed. He glanced around before lowering his voice. "Are you sure you did not misplace it?" Mara shook her head. "I checked everywhere. Someone took it." Nathan's eyes darkened. He leaned closer. "Then you cannot go home alone tonight. Not if someone is watching you." The words chilled her. She wanted to argue, but his tone left no room. He handed her a chart as though it were nothing more than routine exchange, and walked away. To anyone watching, it was ordinary. To Mara, it was warning. She spent the rest of the day moving like a ghost, her mop strokes slow, her eyes darting toward every doorway. Twice she thought she saw Dr. Halverson watching her from the end of the hall, his face unreadable. Once she caught Clara Ames glancing her way with something close to pity. By late afternoon, she slipped into the storage closet and closed the door. The bulb buzzed faintly, casting long shadows across the shelves. She pressed her back against the wall and closed her eyes. Her chest ached with the weight of it all, the patience, the silence, the stolen vial. She whispered into the dim air, her voice barely audible. "They are already watching me." The door creaked open. Mara's eyes snapped open, her body tense. Clara stepped inside, her face pale, her breath uneven. "You need to leave this alone," Clara said quickly, her voice sharp with urgency. "You do not understand what you are pulling at." Mara's throat tightened. "Then tell me. Please, tell me what I am not supposed to see." Clara's jaw clenched. For a long moment, silence hung between them. Then Clara whispered, "It is not just one, doctor. It is not just one case. The orders come from higher, and no one questions them because no one wants to lose what they have here." The bulb flickered once overhead. Mara felt the words sink into her bones, heavy and cold. "They are poisoning them," she said, her voice flat. Clara flinched, as though the word itself burned. She shook her head quickly. "Do not say it. Not here." Mara stepped closer. "Then help me. If you know, you cannot stay silent." Clara's eyes glistened, though no tears fell. "You think courage will save you?" "It will not. They will break you, Mara. They will grind you down until no one remembers your name." Mara held her gaze. "Then at least I will not be complicit." For a moment Clara looked as though she might argue, but then her shoulders sagged. She pressed something into Mara's hand, a folded slip of paper, heavier than the blank one before. "If you are going to chase this, you will need a place to start. But do not say I did not warn you." She slipped out before Mara could respond, leaving the closet in silence. Mara unfolded the paper slowly. On it was a room number, written in hurried ink. Her pulse quickened. She folded it carefully, sliding it into her pocket. For the first time in days, she felt a thread of direction. That evening, she left the hospital later than usual. The rain had eased, but the air was damp, the sky heavy with clouds. As she walked toward the bus stop, her eyes scanned the street. No idling cars, no figure beneath the lamppost. Still, unease pressed against her. She reached her apartment and locked the door behind her. The radiator ticked faintly in the silence. She pulled the slip of paper from her pocket and laid it on the table. The room number stared back at her, stark and simple. Mara leaned forward, her elbows pressed to the wood, her breath slow and steady. The vial was gone, stolen from under her roof. The shadows had already marked her. But now she had something new, an opening, a thread to follow. Her eyes fixed on the slip of paper, the ink dark under the dim lamp. She whispered into the quiet, "Tomorrow." The word hung heavy in the room, more promise than plan. Outside her window, the night thickened, pressing close against the glass. The slip of paper lay on Mara Whitfield's table all night, its ink dark against the wood, a room number stark and unyielding. She hardly slept. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw the missing vial, the pale faces in their hospital beds, the figure in the streetlight watching her from the shadows. When dawn came gray and thin, she rose without hesitation. At the hospital, she moved as she always did, her mop bucket squeaking faintly, her head lowered. But every step carried her closer to the number folded in her pocket. The corridors seemed sharper that morning, the light too bright, the voices around her edged with suspicion. She wondered who knew, who had taken the vial, who had already marked her for silence. By mid-morning, she reached the wing she rarely cleaned. The sign above the door read, "Research Storage." She paused, pretending to adjust the mop handle, waiting for the hall to empty. When the last footsteps faded, she slipped inside. The air was different here, cooler, with the faint hum of refrigeration units. The walls were lined with cabinets, their metal doors labeled with codes. The smell was sharp, chemical, sterile. She moved carefully, her heart hammering, until she found the number Clara had written. The cabinet door creaked faintly as she opened it. Inside, rows of small vials sat neatly arranged, each filled with clear or faintly tinted liquids. Labels marked them with dates, patient numbers, initials. Mara's breath caught. She reached for one and held it up to the light. The liquid inside looked ordinary, but the faint metallic tang rose as soon as she loosened the cap. The same smell. Bitter. Wrong. Her hands trembled. She set the vial back carefully, then pulled another. The same trace. Another and another. Not one, not two. Dozens. Her throat tightened. This was no accident. Not an isolated mistake. It was systematic, organized, recorded. She froze at the sound of footsteps in the hall. Quickly, she closed the cabinet and stepped back, gripping the mop handle like a shield. The door opened. Dr. Halverson stood there, his sharp eyes sweeping the room. "What are you doing here?" His voice was flat, cold. Mara lowered her gaze. "Cleaning, sir." Halverson's eyes lingered on her too long. He stepped inside, his gaze moving toward the cabinet she had just closed. His hand rested on the handle for a moment before he turned back to her. "Do not wander," he said quietly. "This area is restricted." "Yes, sir," Mara murmured. He studied her once more, then left, the door closing behind him. Mara's pulse thundered in her ears. She gripped the mop so tightly her knuckles whitened. He had known. He had been checking. When the hall fell silent again, she forced herself to breathe. She pushed the bucket slowly toward the door, every step deliberate, rehearsed. She slipped back into the main corridor as if nothing had happened, her face calm, her movements steady. But inside, her resolve had hardened. The missing vial had been a warning. The figure in the streetlight had been a threat. But now she had seen the truth with her own eyes. It was bigger than she imagined, and more dangerous. That evening, she sat in her apartment with the slip of paper still on the table, the radiator ticking faintly in the silence. She thought of Clara, of the fear in her eyes. She thought of Nathan, of his willingness to listen. She thought of the patients lying pale and silent in their beds, lips edged with blue. Her hands curled into fists. Proof existed, rows of it, hidden behind metal doors. She had touched it, smelled it. The question was how to bring it into the light without being crushed first. She turned off the lamp and sat in the dark, listening to the city outside. Cars passed occasionally, their headlights flashing against the window. Somewhere in the street below, a dog barked once, sharp and lonely. Mara whispered into the darkness, her voice steady now. "Tomorrow, I will go back." The words hung in the air like a vow. Outside, the night pressed close against the glass. She felt its weight, heavy and watchful. But she did not look away.